from the government, the private sector, the academe, and think tanks. Allow me to also welcome some of our important guests today, particularly General Manny Bautista, former Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, General Edilberto Adan, Undersecretary in the Presidential Commission on the Visiting Forces Agreement, ASIC JV Chan of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Colonel Joar Herrera, Deputy Chief of Staff of J7 of AFP, Secretary or former Secretary Delphine Lorenzana, former Defense Secretary, retired Vice Admiral Alexander Pamaser, former Flag Officer in Command of the Philippine Navy, and we also have Rear Admiral Roy Vincent Trinidad, the spokesperson for the West Philippine Sea. Again, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I am Joyce Ilas Reyes, Deputy Executive Director for Strategic Engagements of the Strat-based ADR Institute, and I will be your host and moderator for today. Welcome to our forum entitled Impact of Regional Conflicts on Global Security. Now, this event is organized by the Strat-based ADR Institute in partnership with the Embassy of Poland in the Philippines. This event is also part of the official visit of Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski here in the Philippines. Welcome, sir, to Manila. Since formalizing ties in 1973, both the Philippines and Poland have steadily expanded cooperation across various fields, including trade, economy, and defense. The 51-year relationship highlights the commitment to deepening mutual understanding and collaboration, paving the way for continued growth and shared prosperity in the years ahead. Now, this partnership is especially important now, considering the evolving geopolitical dynamics in the Indo-Pacific that are significantly reshaping the region's security landscape, with various factors such as the war in Ukraine and the tensions in the West Philippine Sea playing critical roles. Poland's role in Eastern Europe parallels the Philippines' position in the Indo-Pacific, with both nations at the forefront of major geopolitical tensions. Poland's rise as a geopolitical power is marked by its proactive defense posture and strategic alliances. Facing Russia, Poland has become a key player in Europe's defense, much like the Philippines' role in regional security against China's actions in the West Philippine Sea. So, as Poland strengthens its military and solidifies its role within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, it mirrors the Philippines' efforts to strengthen its defense and deepen regional alliances. Through these actions, Poland is not only resisting external pressures, but also shaping regional security dynamics and contributing to the global effort to uphold the rule of law. Poland and Philippines definitely can mutually benefit from each other's security strategies. And today, we hope to explore that even further. That is why we are bringing together government and military officials, members of the diplomatic community, and key opinion leaders and experts to discuss the impacts of regional conflicts on global security. So, to officially open today's forum, it is our privilege to have with us today the Charge d'Affaires of the Embassy of the Republic of Poland in the Philippines, His Excellency Jarosław Szczepankiewicz. Let's give him a round of applause, please. Would you like to give an opening remark, sir?
Distinguished guests, secretaries, representative of the Filipino government, and the Filipino Armed Forces. So it's a great pleasure. I think that, and having here our Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was in the past Minister of Defense, I think we will have a presentation and address that will touch in very acute way the problems of the security and the regional problems that are very similar in some sense between geostrategical situation of the Philippines and Poland. I remember one of the general generals of United States said that the Philippines are Poland in Asia. So you know this comparison. I know that it's a little bit exaggerated, but it's touching to the core of the problem. So we are facing the same challenges, and in the global world, everything is connected. And as you know, only two countries separate our both countries. Guess which one? China and Russia. You are we are bordering them. So it means that both countries are a problem for us, and they're interconnected as well in the temptation of changing world order. So we enter in the time of instability and the temptation of reshape world order. So we don't know what will be outcome of this temptation, but we see it is the process is on the military level, economic, and in everything. So there's mainly two powerful players like Russia and China. They are leaders of this temptation of changing international law that is making, they are disseminating a lot of uncertainty and the danger for us because they want a new world order, a new law that will be dictated by powerful against weak. So, so this is another similarity of our situation. So I am very eager to hear my minister to say how he is seeing this interconnectivity of our problem with Russia, Russia relation to China, and China to the Philippines. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very good, morning.
Thank you very much, His Excellency Yaroslav Chepankiewicz. So to deliver our keynote address today, it is our honor to have with us today the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Poland, His Excellency Radosław Sikorski. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Ambassador, for making my speech for me. Um, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, almost 9,500 kilometers separate Manila from Warsaw. Poland's and Philippines' historic paths did not cross often. Our societies have been shaped by their unique experiences. The intensity of trade and cultural relations leave much room for improvement. And yet, despite all these differences, we share the same strategic interest, maintaining stability of the international order based on free economic exchange and peaceful coexistence of sovereign states. The international order, both our countries and our people benefited from, myself included. 10,000 kilometers from here, nestled in a calm, green, peaceful Polish countryside, there is an old, spacious house. It has stood there for hundreds of years, changing hands, falling into ruin under communism, only to be rebuilt recently. When I bought it for literally a few $100s in 1989, it was on the verge of collapsing. There were holes in the roof, the windows were broken or missing, the walls cracked. Farm animals strolled the rooms. The state of that property mirrored the state of the Polish economy at the time. After over 4 decades of communism, inflation was running at 350% in 1989, only to exceed 680% in 1990. The unemployment rate, kept artificially low in the state-run economy, quickly reached 15% and did not stop there. Public finances were in an equally pitiful condition. The government was literally bankrupt, unable to serve its foreign debts. Once the borders opened, shops and markets were suddenly flooded with goods coming from the West, but hardly anybody could afford them. In 1990, our GDP per capita, taking into account the purchasing power parity, stood at 6,181 in current dollars, barely half of what it was at the time in Portugal, which was then one of the two newest members of what would later become the European Union. Poland entered a new era, but like the house that I bought, it badly needed renovation. Luckily, the 3 decades turned out to be the most prosperous in our country's 1,000-year history. Between 1990 and 2023, our GDP per capita, calculated again in purchasing power parity, increased by 209% and is now higher than Portugal's. Foreign direct investments increased by 334 times. Yes, you heard me well. 334 times. And the value of Poland's exports rose by over 28 times. These economic data are not just numbers, they translate into improvements in people's everyday lives. The average life expectancy rose by almost 7 years for women and over 8 years for men. The Human Development Index, which measures the quality of life, increased by over 23%, the best result in our region. During these 3 decades, we had our ups and downs. Our political scene is very lively, and it's become polarized. And people's dissatisfaction with many state institutions remains stubbornly high. But there is no denial that we've done well. And this has been made possible by two factors: political and economic freedoms, which unleashed people's creativity, and, of course, stable and supportive international environment, which made people feel secure enough to take risks, to set up businesses, and invest in the future. At this difficult time, we could not rely on modern industrial base because we didn't have it. We could not rely on intergenerational private wealth because most of it was destroyed and plundered during repeated wars which swept over Poland in the 19th and the first half of the 20th century. Unlike some other countries in Europe, we could not turn to our former colonies because Poland was never a colonial power. In fact, we were colonized by more powerful neighbors, such as Russia. Presented with an opportunity, Poles proved that they can take it. And although I'm very proud of what my compatriots have achieved, I believe there is nothing supernatural about it. Many other countries, including the Philippines, followed a similar path. In the last decades, you have also enjoyed an impressive growth. Today, your country's expanding middle class and large young population can, I'm sure, boost the economy to the next level, if only you're given the chance. Recent history clearly shows that a stable international environment, trust, and mutual cooperation can bring tangible benefits to countries and to their citizens. Peace works. Peace pays off. It is not some Western construct imposed on the world, but the general truth, equally applicable in Europe, in the Middle East, or in Southeast Asia. But not everybody agrees. The world is again in flux. The rules-based international order is being contested, not only by terrorist groups, and you know something about that, or rogue non-state actors, but unfortunately, as of late, by major powers. Countries around the globe, interconnected by a dense network of political, economic, and cultural relations, have felt the consequences. Disruptions on the other side of the world reverberate in our everyday lives. As the Filipino proverb says, the pain of the little finger is felt by the whole body. Poles and Filipinos understand that very well. How could we not, given that our countries sit on the very edges of the geopolitical tectonic plates? Some, including President Joe Biden, argue that the world has come to an inflection point, with authoritarian regimes pitted against the world's democracies. And these authoritarian regimes tend to be also heads of revisionist powers, countries that are not happy with the borders that they have inherited. While I share the concern about the gravity of the situation, I believe it is not so much a struggle between democratic and non-democratic states. It is a contest between those who value stability and predictability with those who seek chaos and disruption, between agents of development and agents of destruction. Vladimir Putin's Russia is one but hardly an isolated example of the latter. Displaying a total disregard for international law and the United Nations Charter, the Kremlin launched an illegal colonial war against Ukraine, trying to recover Ukraine as a colony. Instead of investing in the well-being of ordinary Russians, the leader of the largest country in the world that spans 11 time zones decided that what his people needed most was other people's land. Really? Is that what Russia really needs? I was just in Singapore, small country without natural resources that has managed to make its people rich. Russia, very large country with every natural resource in the world that has managed to make its people poor. Those are alternative business models, and I know which I prefer. It didn't pay off. Vladimir Putin's special military operation, which was planned to last a few days, has dragged on for more than 2.5 years. And over 1 million people have now been killed or injured on both sides. This is not some regional squabble. This is a major war, that the likes of which Europe hasn't seen since the Second World War, arguably since the First World War, because we have trench warfare again. Instead of gaining control over Ukraine, Putin now needs to defend Russia's own territory. I wouldn't call that a success. Instead of pushing NATO away from Russian borders, he forced two new countries, Sweden and Finland, to join the alliance. Instead of proving Europe's weakness and dependency on Russian natural resources, he lost the lucrative European market and has since become more and more dependent on China. That's not my definition of success. My great friend and mentor, former US National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, once said that Russia faces a choice. It can either be an ally of the West or a vassal of China. Vladimir Putin chose the latter. It remains to be seen if his society follows. But if I were a Russian patriot or nationalist, I would be quite angry with Vladimir Putin right now. 2.5 years since the start of the invasion, Russia is weaker and poorer, but that does not mean that its leaders are less determined. Unwilling or unable to invest in the development of their country, the Kremlin sees the war and the disruption it brings as a shortcut to global prominence. Unfortunately, Russia is not alone in its efforts to challenge the rules-based international order. There are other countries dissatisfied with the position they have and demanding more space, more consideration, and more influence. Aware of that, Russia presents itself as a part of a broader movement to establish a supposedly fairer and more balanced international system. Russian propagandists, along with their allies, try to convince the world they are trying to create a new multipolar order where smaller state sovereignty will be respected and cherished. This is as long as it does not collide with bigger players' imperial ambitions, in which case, as we can see in Ukraine, all bets are off. There are countries, including Russia and China, which routinely accuse NATO and other military alliances formed by democratic states of provoking hostilities, either in Central Europe or in the Indo-Pacific. Such accusations are unfounded. All these alliances, including NATO, AUKUS, and the Quad, were designed solely to maintain the international order as it is and to provide security to its members. As democracies, we don't seek to slay dragons in faraway places. We just want to be left alone. Let me also remind you about the many attempts made over the years to include Putin's Russia in the European and global security architecture, all of them ultimately rejected by the Kremlin. We must not lose sight of the consequences of Russian victory in Ukraine, and of course I hope it doesn't happen. It would embolden other countries keen on regaining control over what they see as their mutinous colonies or spheres of influence, not only in Europe, but around the world, in the Middle East, in South America, and here in Southeast Asia. As you are aware better than I, this is already happening, and we are already paying the bills. European military expenditures have significantly increased. Poland is spending 4.3% of its GDP on defense this year, the highest in NATO, including the United States. And next year, we're going higher. We're going to 4.7% of GDP on defense. And if needs be, we'll go higher still. We will do whatever it takes not to become a Russian colony again. Investors' confidence in some parts of Europe has gone down. The predictability of the business environment has weakened. Business has rediscovered geopolitical risks. The safety of maritime routes has been challenged, as you know. The reliability of supply chains for crucial goods, including food and pharmaceuticals, can no longer be taken for granted. Thank you, Vladimir Putin. As the trust goes down, the cost of doing business goes up, and someone always has to pay the bill, and usually it's the ultimate customer, the people. I've been to Singapore, as I've mentioned, to Malaysia, in the Philippines. We are all, and you are all paying for Putin's adventurers through the higher food prices and higher energy costs. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not doomed to a grim future. Yes, the current world order has never fully lived up to its founding principles. Yes, the institutions designed to protect these principles, with the UN Security Council being a prime example, have become ineffective and dysfunctional. Yes, developing countries around the world deserve greater representation in international institutions. By the way, Poland feels discriminated against too. We are still in the East European grouping at the UN, where Russia vetoes all appointments and decisions, and Western Europe is still overrepresented. All this reform can be achieved by means other than war or behavior bordering on aggression. Being in positions of power, we politicians, diplomats, entrepreneurs are often faced with the question what world we want to leave to future generations. It'll certainly not be perfect, and we will never have all the answers. But if history is any guidance, then based on still vivid memories of the 20th century, we must remember that violence begets violence, and that international order based on cooperation serves us better than one based on coercion. We've seen that movie. We know how it ends. We don't want to see it again. But we know an imperialist threat when we see it. Too many times we have been a victim of neighboring powers. We know what loss of independence feels like. There is vivid discussion inside the European Union about sovereignty. And Britain, for example, left the European Union because it felt that its sovereignty was being affected. Well, I was born in communist Poland. If communist Poland had tried to leave the Warsaw Pact or the Comecon, it would have meant a Soviet invasion, just like the Soviet invasion on Hungary when they tried it, or on Czechoslovakia when they tried it. That's what lack of sovereignty looks like. You are subject to an armed aggression. Whereas what we have in Europe is the pooling of some aspects of sovereignty for a greater good. The world seems more and more preoccupied with the rivalry between big powers, and one may feel that medium and small countries, especially those that are distant from the area of conflict, have little role to play. I disagree. The extensive network of connections between states around the world works both ways. Not only negative consequences impact on us, but positive outcomes, though less often, also. And a difference can be made in numerous ways, among others by voicing political support in defense of international law and in defense of the outcomes of arbitration. As one of your other famous proverbs says, a broom is sturdy because its strands are tightly bound. Let us continue to work closely while keeping that in mind, not only out of our goodness, out of the goodness of our hearts, but in pursuit of our strategic interests. Distinguished guests, when over 30 years ago I bought that decrepit manor house in Western Poland, I did not know if I will ever manage to fully restore it. Back then, the Soviet Union still existed, thousands of Polish troops were still stationed in Poland, and the economic future looked murky at best. The following years brought me time, resources, and enough sense of security to keep investing in this tiny piece of my homeland. What I wish for my children is to be granted the same opportunity. I believe parents in my country and in your country are no different. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, His Excellency. His Excellency Radosław Sikorski. Very interesting and very insightful speech from His Excellency. All right. We have a panel of esteemed geopolitical and national security experts with us this morning who will deliver their reactions on the keynote address delivered by Minister Sikorski. All right. So our first reactor for today is a senior lecturer at the Asian Center at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He is also a columnist at the Philippine Daily Inquirer and a non-resident fellow at the Strat-based ADR Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Mr. Richard Haydarian.
Thank you. I was expecting to go a bit later on. I think this room should be renamed as Capit Room rather than Cappy's Room. It's a little bit too cozy, and I notice everyone's having a hard time navigating their way out of this. I'll keep my intervention very short because I look forward to my longer conversation with the foreign minister later on for our interview. Let me just talk very big picture and forward. my friends in Berlin have a term for it. They call it oppression or misery Olympics. And I think if you look at the history of both Poland and the Philippines, we have a lot of misery and oppression in common. If you look at the 19th century, I think both of our nations were fisted upon by rival empires. In the case of Poland, of course, a great nation that disappeared from the map on multiple occasions. In the case of the Philippines, our modern nation state was born out of this transition, very difficult and traumatic transition from Spanish colonization to American colonization. By the Second World War, towards the end of that, Manila and Warsaw were two of the three most devastated cities on earth. And imagine how traumatic the 20th century was for us. But to be a little bit more forward looking, I think, as correctly pointed out by the good foreign minister, the 21st century is presenting us a lot of uncertainties, but also a lot of opportunity and self-assuredness and confidence that I think was not there throughout the 20th century. And if you look at both Poland and the Philippines, I think in many ways we're a representation of this more self-assured middle powers who are exercising influence in their part of the world. And more importantly, of course, we're also exercising strategic agency, I think, which is something that is often forgotten. Because if you look at the conventional narratives out there, especially in certain circles, the world is divided between rival great powers, and as if we are just pawns on the chessboard of these powers. But if you look at the dynamism that Poland and increasingly the Philippines is displaying in their respective regions in the world, we're also showing that we do have strategic agency and we can shape also interaction among the major powers and also the broader international order. So, three quick points. First of all, I think this very cozy capit meeting that we're having right now is a reflection of how two of our countries are becoming more proactive on the international level. I mean, in terms of Poland, you are having your own perhaps pivot to the Indo-Pacific and showing that you can exercise a lot of agency on the international level, and also we can share our lessons from the own struggles we have with the revisionist powers in our regions in the world. In the same way, if you look at the Philippines, whether it was the previous Duterte administration or the current Marcos administration, despite all of the differences, I'm not saying this because they're officials from the previous administration. Um, Despite that, I think the continuity we see here is the emphasis on having an independent foreign policy. This idea that at the end of the day, it should be our national interest and it should be our footprint that should influence our immediate strategic environment. And I think it is in that spirit that the Philippines is reaching out more proactively than ever to new strategic partners. And I can see Poland definitely could be a very, very important one. I've followed how Poland and South Korea, for instance, are developing a very strong defense relationship over the past year or so, as South Korea and Japan also develop a special relationship with NATO in light of the defense assistance they're providing to a lot of European countries who are also on the front line of helping Ukraine against Russia's aggression. Who knows what kind of other kind of intersectional strategic interface we can have in the coming years. The other thing that I feel makes Poland and the Philippines very interestingly similar is that in a sense we're both non-Western countries. I mean, you're still technically an Eastern European country, as you mentioned. The Philippines, we are an Asian country with some sort of a